She was alone, her wagon destroyed, her land in ruins, and the only man who could help her was a widower who had sworn to himself he would never feel anything again. Ethan Cole had not spoken Margaret's name out loud in 4 months, not because he had forgotten her. He could no more forget Margaret than he could forget how to breathe, but because speaking her name in the silence of the ranch made the silence louder, made the empty chair at the kitchen table feel like something with weight, made the mornings, which were already difficult, feel impossible. So he worked. That was all he knew how to do anymore. Up before dawn, boots on before his eyes had fully adjusted to the dark, out into the cold Wyoming air where the land asked things of him that had nothing to do with grief. The cattle needed water, the fences needed checking. The creek on the eastern edge of his property had been running dangerously low for 2 weeks. If it dried up completely, he would lose animals, and losing animals meant the only thing he had left to lose. It was late April of 1876 when he rode out to check the water levels and found, instead, a woman who would change every remaining year of his life. He heard her before he saw her, a sharp crack of metal, then a sound that was half word and half fury, controlled and precise the way a person sounds when they are furious but too disciplined to fully surrender to it. He pulled his horse Scout to a stop and listened. Another crack. Then silence. Then her voice again, low, talking herself through something the way people do when they refuse to be beaten by whatever is beating them. He came around the bend slowly, hands where she could see them. The wagon had lost its rear axle entirely. The whole back end collapsed into the mud at the creek's edge. She was crouched beside it, examining the damage with the focused expression of someone calculating what could still be saved. Dark auburn hair fought loose from its pins, travel coat caked at the hem with Wyoming mud, and on the flat rock beside her, positioned with obvious intention, a rifle within one arm's reach. She heard Scout and rose immediately, turning to face him. Her eyes were hazel and direct, and completely unafraid. "I'm not trouble," Ethan said quietly. She looked at him the way experienced people look at weather, quickly, completely, reaching a conclusion before others would have finished looking. "Eliza Bennett," she said, then standing straight. "My great-uncle was Henry Bennett. He owned the 400 acres east of this creek. I've come to claim it." Ethan went still. Henry Bennett's land. He had ridden past that abandoned spread for years. The house roof was half collapsed, the fences long gone to rot, the pastures swallowed back by wild grass. He had quietly assumed, in the private corners of his own thinking, that nobody was ever coming for it. He had even, once or twice, allowed himself to imagine purchasing it. He had not imagined this. "You came alone?" he asked carefully. Something moved behind her eyes, not offense, but the specific exhaustion of a woman who has answered that question more times than it deserves. "My business partner withdrew in Denver," she said. "I had already committed, so I came." Thunder rolled in from the west. Both of them looked up. The sky along the horizon had turned the color of a bad decision, dark purple, moving fast, carrying the kind of rain that turned creek banks into something dangerous. "You can't stay out here tonight," Ethan said. "I can manage." "Ma'am." His voice was not commanding, just certain. "That storm will flood this bank. Henry's house won't keep you dry. I know because I've ridden past it and the roof is mostly sky now. My ranch is 3 miles north. You can stay until morning and we can talk about next steps." She looked at the sky. He could see her doing the calculation, pride against survival, independence against common sense. "My rifle comes with me," she said. "I'd worry if it didn't," he answered. For the first time, something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, but close. Maria, Diego's wife, had the kind of warmth that made strangers feel like family before they had finished sitting down. Within an hour of arriving at the ranch, Eliza Bennett had dry clothes, hot food, and coffee strong enough to argue with. Diego took her horse and wagon materials without being asked. Ethan sat across the table and let the silence settle naturally between them. She told him her plan without dressing it up. She had savings. She had 9 years of experience running her father's dry goods business in Ohio. The books, the negotiations, the supplier relationships, the whole architecture of keeping something alive when the margins were thin. She was not a rancher, but she was not helpless either, and the land was hers, legally without any question. "You can't run 400 acres alone," Ethan said. Honest, not cruel. She knew that, she said again. He was starting to understand that Eliza Bennett said those 2 words not as defeat, but as the starting point of every solution she had ever built. The agreement they signed the next morning was 3 pages of tight, careful language, most of it written by her hand. Grazing rights on the eastern pasture and creek access in exchange for labor, materials, and his knowledge of the land. Everything documented, everything fair. Diego read it later and said something in Spanish that made Maria laugh. "What did he say?" Eliza asked. "He said," Maria translated carefully, "that this is the first contract Ethan has ever signed that he didn't write himself." Ethan said nothing, but something in him, something that had been closed for a long time, opened just slightly, like a window in a room that had forgotten what outside air felt like. The work was hard and the days were long, and Eliza Bennett did not ask for any accommodations that were not also offered to the men. She was inside the wreckage of her great-uncle's house, pulling rotted timber before the second week was out, learning the language of construction the way she learned everything, by asking direct questions and then paying absolute attention to the answers. It was on one of those evenings, when the day's work was done and the light was turning gold across the new timber framing of her rebuilt porch, that she asked him about Margaret. He had not expected it. People generally moved around the subject of Margaret the way they moved around a loose floorboard, carefully, trying not to make it worse. Eliza simply asked, quietly, directly, the way she did everything. And Ethan, to his own surprise, told her. He told her about Margaret's laugh, which was too loud for polite company and absolutely perfect, about how she believed in this land before he fully believed in it himself, about the morning she died, a February morning, very cold, very quiet, and how the silence that followed had never completely gone away. 6 years, he said, and some mornings it still feels like 6 days. Eliza was quiet for a long moment. "She sounds like someone worth grieving properly," she said. He looked at her. "Most people tell me it's been long enough." "Most people," she said gently, "are afraid of grief because they haven't learned to sit with it. That's their discomfort, not your timeline." He looked at her for a long moment in the fading light. Something moved in his chest, something he did not have a name for yet, something he was not ready for. He looked away from it, back at the land, the way you look away from a light that is too bright, not because it is unwelcome, but because you are not yet ready for what seeing it clearly might mean. Victor Hale came to the ranch on a Thursday morning in May, and Ethan knew the moment he saw the man ride in that this was not a social call. Hale was broad and well-dressed in the way that men are well-dressed when they want you to think about what they can afford. He had wanted the Bennett property for years. The creek access alone was worth more than most people in Red Hollow understood. He had waited, certain that whoever came to claim it would eventually fold. He looked at Eliza the way men looked at things they had already decided belonged to them. "Miss Bennett," he said, his voice carrying the particular smoothness of someone who has practiced being reasonable while meaning something else entirely. "I want to make you a fair offer for this property before you sink any more time or money into it. This is hard country. It breaks people who aren't prepared for it." "I appreciate your concern," Eliza said evenly. "The property is not for sale." Something shifted behind Hale's eyes, just slightly, just enough. "You might want to think carefully," he said. "Things out here can get complicated very quickly for people who don't have the right—" He paused, and the pause was deliberate. "Connections." Ethan stepped forward then, not aggressively, just forward, so that he was standing beside Eliza rather than behind her. "I think you've said what you came to say," Ethan said quietly. Hale looked at him for a long moment. Then he smiled, the kind of smile that has no warmth in it anywhere, and turned his horse and rode back down the road. Diego watched him go. "That men will not accept this answer," he said. "No," Ethan agreed. "He won't." They were right. A load of lumber went missing. A fence was cut in the night. 2 of Eliza's horses were spooked so badly they broke through a gate and were gone for 2 days. Each incident deniable, each one a message. Then on a Tuesday night in late June, Ethan's barn burned. The fire woke everyone on the ranch. They formed a line from the water trough and fought it the way people fight things they know they are losing, desperately, refusing to stop, refusing to accept the outcome even as the roof came down in a wall of sparks that rose into the dark sky like terrible stars. They saved the horses. They saved nothing else. Ethan stood in the ash afterward, the smell of it in his clothes, his throat, his hair. Diego stood beside him and said nothing because there was nothing to say. Then he heard her boots on the ground behind him, and Eliza was there, standing beside him in the ash and the dark and the smell of everything he had built that was now gone. She didn't say it would be all right. She didn't say anything for a long time. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "This is because of my land, because of me." He turned to look at her. Her face in the darkness was stricken, not with fear, but with something that looked like guilt, and the guilt was worse than fear. "No," he said firmly. "This is because of a man who believes the world belongs to whoever is willing to be the worst thing in the room. That is not your fault. That is his nature." She looked at him for a long moment. "What do we do?" she asked. "We build the case," he said. "Every incident, every date, every witness, and we do it properly, with the sheriff, with paper and signatures, so that when it ends completely. And if he does something worse before it ends? Then we stand," Ethan said, "together." It was the first time he had said that word to her and meant it the way it landed between them, not as ranching partners, not as neighbors, but as something he did not yet have the courage to name. She heard it. He knew she heard it by the way she held his gaze a moment longer than was necessary. Then she nodded. "Together," she said quietly. The case they built was slow and careful and exactly right. Ethan rode to town and filed reports, dates, damages, descriptions, with a thoroughness that surprised the sheriff. Eliza wrote letters to the county seat, documenting every incident with the precision of someone who had spent years keeping records that could withstand scrutiny. 2 men who had accepted payment from Hale to cause the damage began, separately, to feel the weight of what they had done. One of them came forward. The town, when it understood the full shape of what had been happening, did not stay quiet. Neighbors who had said nothing offered to take night watch. Men who had done business with Hale for years looked at the evidence and looked away from him. Women brought food to the ranch and stayed to talk, and the talk carried information. Who had seen what? Who had heard what? Who was willing to say so? Victor Hale had looked at an old widower and a woman alone and believed he understood the situation entirely. He had understood nothing. It was a warm July evening when Ethan finally said what had been true for weeks. They were sitting on the rebuilt porch of her house, the work completed, the land around them quiet and still. The stars were coming out one by one over the Wyoming hills, and somewhere in the distance a creek was moving, the same creek where they had first met. "I didn't come out to help you just because of the grazing rights," he said. Eliza looked out at the stars and did not speak immediately. "I know," she said softly. "I wanted to know you," he said, "from the first morning. Something about the way you were standing there with everything fallen apart around you, and you were still thinking, still calculating. I thought, whoever this woman is, I want to understand how she thinks." She was quiet for a moment longer. "I was afraid," she said finally. "Not of Hale, not of the land. I was afraid that what I was feeling was just gratitude or loneliness from the road, or the particular vulnerability that comes from needing help. I needed to be sure it was real. "And now?" he asked. She turned to look at him, directly, the way she looked at everything. "Ethan," she said, "you stood beside me in the ashes of your own barn and told me it was not my fault. You have never once made me feel like a burden or a complication or something to be managed. You have treated me like a person whose judgment matters. Do you know how rare that is?" He didn't answer, because the answer was in his face already. "I am sure," she said quietly. "I have been sure for a while." They were married in September, under the cottonwood trees at the creek's edge. The whole of Red Hollow came. Diego cried and denied it for the rest of his life. Maria did not deny it at all. 3 of Margaret's closest friends attended, and one of them held Ethan's hand before the ceremony and told him that Margaret would have approved. And he had to stand very still for a moment and look at the sky before he could answer her. Victor Hale was arrested 4 days before the wedding. The evidence, patient and complete, had finally been enough. He did not attend the celebration. Nobody noticed his absence. The years that came after were not gentle in the way that easy years are gentle. There were dry summers that cracked the earth and hard winters that tested everything they had built. There was a year when cattle prices fell so far that Ethan sat at the kitchen table with the ledgers and couldn't see a way through, and Eliza sat down across from him and opened her own set of books and showed him, number by number, the path they had not seen yet. There was a morning when James, their eldest, fell from a horse and lay still in the field for long enough that Ethan felt something inside him turn to ice, and Eliza was already running before he had finished shouting. The boy was all right, but those were the moments that showed you what a life was made of. 3 children grew up on that ranch. James first, then Ruth, then a boy they named Henry, after Eliza's great-uncle, because she said it was right to honor the man whose land had made everything possible. Those children grew into adults who knew how to work and how to keep their word and how to treat people, because those were the things they had watched every single day. The Cole Bennett Ranch became known throughout the territory. Not famous, not grand, but trusted. The kind of place people pointed to when they needed an example of what could be built with patience and honesty, and 2 people who had decided every morning to remain on the same side. Decades later, on a September evening soft with the kind of light that makes old things look beautiful, they sat on the porch together and watched their grandchildren run through the yard below. The sound of it, the noise and laughter and pure aliveness of it, filled Ethan in a way he had never found words for. "Funny thing," he said softly, into the comfortable silence between them. Eliza turned to look at him. "If that axle hadn't cracked, if you'd made it 1 more mile down the road without trouble." She looked out at the land for a moment. "I would have made it to a house with no roof and missed the creek entirely." "And missed me," he said. "And missed you," she agreed. He took her hand. After decades, it still felt like something, like the first time and like the 10,000th time, both at once. "I spent 6 years telling myself my best years were behind me, that I'd had my one good thing and it was gone, and that was simply how it was." She squeezed his hand. "Margaret was your first good thing," she said gently. "I was never meant to replace her. I was meant to be the next chapter." He looked at her. After all these years, she still had the ability to say the exact true thing. "The next chapter," he said, "turned out to be the longest one." "And the best?" she asked. He looked out at the land, at the grandchildren, at the creek catching the last light of the sun, at everything that had grown from a broken axle and a woman who refused to be beaten by anything the world threw at her. "Yeah," he said softly. "The best." The sun went down over Red Hollow, and the children kept running, and the creek kept moving, and two people who had found each other at exactly the right broken moment sat together in the quiet of everything they had built. Not because the road had been easy, but because they had both been brave enough and stubborn enough and willing enough to walk it together. That is the only kind of love that outlasts everything else. The kind you choose every single day, even the hard ones, especially the hard ones. If this story reached something in you, if it reminded you that second chances are real, that love can find you in the most unexpected places, and that it is never too late to build something beautiful, then you are exactly who Desert Heart was created for. Subscribe now and never miss a story worth carrying in your heart. This story holds genuine and lasting value. It portrays a woman in 1876 exercising legal ownership, business intelligence, and fearless self-reliance at a time when history made women largely invisible in such roles. It shows that love built on mutual respect and equal partnership outlasts love built on need or convenience. It demonstrates that justice pursued with patience and evidence is more powerful than anger or confrontation. It shows that grief does not mean a life is finished, that the heart has more chapters than loss tries to convince us it does. And it shows, quietly and powerfully, that community, neighbors who show up, workers who stay loyal, strangers who become family, is the true foundation beneath every individual story of survival and love.